Peoples. Now, I've got one apology for tonight. We've got an apology from Councillor Wolf, and I'm pleased to hear that after surgery yesterday, her daughter is recovering very well. So Nicole is with her young child tonight. Obviously, all other councillors are present, so I don't have to worry about whether there's any leave of absence or any other apologies. So I note there are members of the public who are present. Can I please get an indication if anyone here would like to speak? Okay, fantastic. All right, if you want to speak, you just need to come forward. Please state your name and the suburb in which you reside. You don't need to give any other details. And also, please, what agenda item number that you're speaking to. What we'll do is we will then bring that item forward on the agenda, so you can stay here for when we discuss that. And we are being live streamed. If you don't want to be recorded, then just indicate, and that would be very helpful. And a summary of your remarks will also be included in the minutes, and also any responses that might come about as well. Okay, so you've got 3 minutes. Come forward to the microphone, please, if you wish to address the meeting. Again, just your name and your suburb, please.
Sure. Is that on? Yep. My name's Rod Gardner from Mount Hawthorn. I'm the immediate past president of the Mount Hawthorn Cardinals Football Club, and I'm here to speak in favour of item 6.2 and more specifically endorse the proposal to upgrade the floodlights at Menzies Park. The Cardinals Footy Club has proudly occupied Menzies Park since 1959, and during that time has grown from a small suburban junior footy club to one of the largest sporting clubs, if not the largest sporting club in the city of Vincent, with over 500 players, most of which reside in the city of Vincent. I've spent 15 years at the club in volunteer roles, and during that time I've witnessed the continued growth in player numbers and, just as importantly, volunteer participants. And we now have nearly 100 of our parents who give back to this community club in some form of volunteering role. We're also very proud of the growth in female participation in the game, and this remains the club's top priority. The growth in the club has seen us in the last 10 years move to occupy 2 venues, Menzies Park and Charles Verriard Reserve. Charles Verriard is a shared facility with Mods Hockey Club, meaning our use is restricted to 2.5 nights a week and Sundays on the weekends. This means that our reliance on Menzies Park, and particularly for training on weeknights, is critical. In addition to our 200 or so Auskickers, the club fields around 18 teams each season, give or take. And given that youth teams train twice a week, we need to find 28 1.5-hour training slots each week across the 2 venues. The lights at Menzies have been substandard for some time, limiting training to the northern wing after dark, which is both crowded and dangerous, and impacts the conditions of the turf in that high traffic area. The lighting upgrade proposal will be a welcome change, allowing a safer and more structured training program, ensuring winter traffic is more evenly spread across the oval, assisting in managing turf quality. With a focus on female teams in the younger age groups, the use of Menzies Park for Friday evening fixtures will also become a possibility. We also welcome the community benefit for dog walkers, general fitness users, which we believe ensure a greater cohesion between those user groups and the club, and obviously a greater accessibility to the lit venue. We were certainly encouraged by the overwhelmingly positive response from the community during the recent consultation process, demonstrating that modern lighting design presents negligible impact to surrounding residents as a result of light spill. On behalf of the Cardinals, we thank the City for this initiative and the financial contribution proposed by the City. The club looks forward to cooperating and assisting any way it can to achieve this lighting upgrade outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the next person like to speak, please, and address the meeting?
Hello, I'm Bryce. I live in North Perth. So thanks for listening to me. I'm here to talk about item 5.3, which is the Auckland Street character area, and I'm in opposition of this character area policy. The reason I'm in opposition is for various reasons. I've sent an email in as well. You probably received that. But just reiterating that this whole process started on a nomination with more than 40% votes, and the nomination was from a door knocking appeal. The door knocking essentially was advertised as this characterises the street, but it actually doesn't change anything you can do with the street. As a hopefully long-term resident of Auckland Street, I do plan to do some works, as some of my other friends on the street. Essentially, the reason for opposition is that there was a recent survey that had 11 respondents from up to about 37 households. Now, that's less than 30%, and I give credit to the council and the strategy planning group who worked very, very hard to try and get more interactions. Now, 5 were in opposition and 6 were for, wanting to approve the character area. Now, that makes 6 out of 11, just over 50%, which I think has been, in my discussions with the strategic planner, that's the reason for their recommendation to approve the character area. But actually, 6 out of 11 is probably more like 6 out of 37, which represents about 16%. And I would say 5 people's opinion is probably not strong enough to implement a character area. My biggest concern is that in the policy, it says 40% of votes can be implemented to amend the policy, whereas you need 70% to revoke it. Now, it's a bit of a slippery slope that there's only a few things in the policy currently that I agree with, and a lot of the people on the street do, but I'm very worried about the fact that after 40% vote, or 40 votes, 40% of the 37 households, you could implement anything. And so that's what I'm worried about mostly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who would like to address the meeting, please?
Yeah, hi, Tom from North Perth. I echo what Bryce says, so 5.3. The signatures were initially gathered on false pretenses. So the lady that went around and asked to sign up to see if we could have a councillor come and speak to us. If you look at the heading of that, the information that she was trying to push forward was gathered on false pretenses. I didn't know it was going to go to where it went. Like Bryce said, it does account for about 15% of the people. So I just can't understand how 15% of the people can speak on 100% of the people that live on the street. That doesn't really make any sense. And we already have strict R codes in place that govern the properties in the city of Vincent. So I strongly disagree with making this change. But again, it's I do think the council's worked hard to try and get people to come to the meeting. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to address the meeting? Okay, so if there's no one else who wishes to address the meeting, I will close public question time at 8 minutes past 6. Okay, Governance Manager, can you confirm if any statements have been received?
Yes, so in addition to the questions and statements that we've heard this evening, we have received one additional statement from Yim Chin of North Perth, again in relation to item 5.3. These have been circulated to all council members, and where they contain questions, a response will be provided in the council briefing notes.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest that we need to note?
Thank you, Mayor Zaman. Through you, no declarations of interest have been received. Thanks.
Does anyone here have any declaration of interest they wish to declare? Okay. All right then. So items 6.2 and then 5.3 will be coming through on the agenda. In addition to that, Councillor Warner, do you have any other items you wish to bring?
5.5, 5.6, please.
Councillor Wallace. Okay. Councillor LaFontaine. Councillor Castle. Councillor Greer.
5.1 and 7.4.
Councillor Alexander. Councillor Hallett. Okay. Right. I'll just work this out now. Okay, so we'll go straight to item 6.2, which is the Club Nightlights Program Floodlighting Project proposals. Do we have any questions in relation to this item? Councillor Greer.
Excellent, thank you. I have a couple of quick questions. Noting there was a comment in the community feedback that the reserve is being loved to death and this lighting will cause further deterioration. I was just wondering if administration had any comments in relation to the condition of the turf.
Mayor Zamon. At the moment, the turf is quite heavily impacted during the winter months, but generally speaking, it's centralised to one portion of the venue. So we hope with the additional floodlights, it will allow that wear on the turf to be spread out amongst the rest of the venue.
Excellent, thank you. And one more question. The community have provided significant input through the survey, particularly with a lot of opinions about the turn-off time. And I was just wondering, how will their feedback about the turn-off time and the timing be incorporated, or is that part of a future decision?
For you, Mayor Zamon, it'll be part of a future decision.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Castle.
I had mostly the same questions actually about the condition of the ground, so thank you for asking that. In relation to the turn on and off time of the lights, there was a bit of feedback in the consultation around whether that should be automatic, it should be a set time every day on different days, or whether it was in response to the activity that was actually happening on the ground. And I just wondered if you could provide any more detail about what might be planned for how that would work.
Mayor Zamon. We have the opportunity as part of the design to include a switch effectively that will provide access to the user at the time. So when they rock up, they will turn the lights on, and when they leave, they'll turn the lights off. In addition, we also have the community element as well, which can be set to a certain time, and that can be changed throughout the year depending on light that's available.
Thank you. So, I believe that we've got that function at maybe Britannia as well, and other lights that's only available though to hirers of the grounds, right? They would have a key or a code or something that allows them to do that.
Medium amount of time, that's correct.
Okay, are there any other questions in relation to this item? Okay, great. We'll move on. So the next item we're talking about is outcome of advertising draft of Auckland Street Character Area Guidelines. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Zamon. Just picking up on a couple of questions I had and that were also raised in the gallery and in the public statements. The amount of residents on the street isn't mentioned in the report that I could see. And I know this is something that we discussed the last time this came before council. I'm just wondering if the report could be updated to reflect the percentages of support and objection as a percentage of the total residences on the affected houses, and in comparison to as a percentage of those who responded.
Through you, Mayor Zamon, we can provide that through the briefing notes. I will just make a comment that under the character area guidelines policy that we have, the overarching one, the only numeric measure relates to the 40% to nominate an area. So we've moved past that now, and there's no threshold in terms of what constitutes support.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really just a matter of having enough context to determine what the level of support on the street is. That would be good to see. I also had a question. I'm just trying to find it in the public statement we received today. One of the submitters mentioned a voluntary design guideline approach, and I just wondered if you're aware of what they're referring to and if there's any information that we could get in the briefing notes is fine.
Through you, Mayor Zamon, no, I'm not aware of what they were referring to. I think from a planning perspective, it's not necessarily an opt-in or an opt-out system. The guidelines, if council sought to approve them, would apply all the properties in that area, or equally if council didn't want to proceed with them, then they wouldn't. So less of an opt-in process.
Thank you. And just one final question. There was reference in the public submissions about the difference between I'm trying to find how it was expressed, but basically this houses that were affected by it as opposed to those who weren't, which was not my understanding of how this policy would work. But again, in the briefing notes is fine. I just wonder if we could go through what was said in that statement and just address what that might mean.
Through you, Mayor Simon, I can have a shot now. So I think what the statement was referring to was there are 4, I guess, bad lax type properties where there's been subdivision that's happened. So you end up with a house at the front and then a house at the rear. And so I guess in terms of a summary of the consultation that we recently did, so one property, I think that the term affected would apply to being the front property. So there was 1 support from a front property and 2 objections from a front property.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thanks, that's all.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Warner.
This really comes down to 6 in favour and 5 against. Is there any way we can clarify if those 6 in favour are 6 different households, or are they actually 6 actual residents of the street? And I guess same with the 5 no's. Are we talking about different properties, or are we talking about maybe the same house and three householders all voting as well?
Through you, Mayor Simon, so the advertising of the character area guidelines was sent to all the properties in the character area. So we didn't receive any submissions from owners outside of the area. And in the submissions we received, there was only 1 where both owners of the property supported the guidelines, but that was only counted as 1 submission.
Sorry, okay, are there any other questions in relation to this item? Okay, so now we'll move on to 5.1, review of policy trees of significance. Councillor Greer, you indicated you had some questions.
Thank you, Mayor Simon. Just a couple of questions of clarification. So in the policy guidelines 1.1, we have got towards the bottom, it can be any mature specimen that provides habitat or food for local fauna. And the next dot point, establish trees that are significant from an Aboriginal heritage perspective. Does the height of at least 4 metres apply to those 2 dot points? Or would that be like the one above where it says a height or canopy deemed significant by the city?
So for those last 2 points, there's no height threshold.
Excellent, thank you. And 4.2 and 4.3, we use language of the land owner. And I was just wondering if that should actually be the primary or secondary owner, as referred to in the rest of the document, or if the landowner there, because it implies 1 person if the tree's across 2 people. Yeah, just wondering if that's a typo or if it's a deliberate choice to call it a landowner.
Through you, Mayor Simon, I would say it's the latter. We have, with our current trees that are listed on that inventory, had requests from, I guess, what would be the secondary owners, where the tree isn't on their property itself, but does overhang, and requests about pruning and arborist advice informing that. So I think it's more of a catch-all in that sense.
Okay, so just so I understand, the report would go to the primary owner, or both, being the landowner, or both, the primary owner and the secondary owner?
Through Mesmont, perhaps we'll clarify that through the briefing notes.
Thank you very much. And last one, from my read of the policy, we don't have any timeframes or guidelines between, say, when someone puts an application into the city to get an arborist report and then finding out the outcome of that. I was just wondering if that was a deliberate decision to not have any guidance on timeframes, or if it's something we might like to include.
Through you, Mayor Simon, it was more of a deliberate decision in terms of administration would look to progress that as quickly as we can. Just noting we use our DRP for a few other matters, and I guess part of that process would be the DRP member going on site, so we didn't want to necessarily lock ourselves into specific timeframes, but it's certainly stuff that we would look to progress as quickly as we could.
Excellent, thank you. That was everything.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question around the definition of maintenance pruning and the process for that. Given that the policy recommends that it be undertaken in accordance with the standard, is it anticipated that a resident or a neighbour could determine maintenance pruning on their own, or that they would need to seek advice to ensure that it fit within the definition?
Through you, Mayor Simon, it would probably be more that they would need to seek some level of advice. In the first instance, the city would be able to at least provide some guidance through our supporting guidelines and information that we'll put on our website if this policy is eventually adopted. And then that, I guess, can kind of graduate and escalate through to seeking advice from our DRP if there's still a lack of clarity.
Thank you. And would you anticipate that if that advice was sought in the first instance when the first situation of maintenance pruning was to occur, that the resident or the neighbour would not need to continue to keep seeking advice? I'm just trying to anticipate how much of an administrative burden it is on someone to work out if they can satisfy this policy or not.
Through Mayor Simon, we would be looking to remove as much of that administrative burden as we could. So in terms of a maintenance regime, hopefully it's fairly standard as it progresses. So an initial set of advice hopefully provides enough guidance moving forwards. But again, that's some information we'll look to package up as part of our website as this progresses, to give that guidance around what would generally constitute maintenance pruning in the first instance.
Thank you. Just one more. And I'm just wondering, apologies if I've missed it, if a neighbour was to undertake maintenance pruning on their neighbour's tree that was on the register, and the owner of the tree did not agree with their definition of maintenance pruning or the works that were carried out, what recourse does the owner have to seek any kind of recompense or other action?
Mayor Simon, I guess if there was a dispute about what did or didn't constitute maintenance pruning, if the city received that complaint, we could take a look and see if there's any evidence to support how much pruning did occur and whether that was within the realms of what is exempt. It's a hard one because there is a lack of data around canopy at the moment. So trying to establish exactly how much occurred after it's occurred would be a difficult one. But if that could be established and it exceeded that threshold, then work that requires a retrospective development approval.
Okay, so there's no fines or enforcement. It would be that it is retrospectively determined to not have fit within the definition or have fit. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Simon, yeah. So if it was determined that it didn't fit within that definition, they would need to seek development approval for that. And I guess the decision, depending on what that decision was, if that application were refused, then there is a compliance response that comes from there.
Perhaps that can be considered as part of the package of information when and if this policy is amended, just to well, try to avoid the situation of the city having to get involved in disputes between neighbours, but to make it clear what people can and can't do.
Okay, are there any further questions in relation to this item? Okay, moving on. So the next item is Scarborough Beach Road, Mount Hawthorn, cash in lieu car parking contribution debt write-off. Councillor Warner, you had some questions?
Yeah, this is a strange one. Work out what my exact questions are. If this was to be written off, are there any penalties at all or any compromise that can be reached? Because the city is still sort of, I guess, out of pocket. Is there, so if we're writing it off, is there any compromise that can be reached between the landowners' reps or the new business owners and the council? I say this also in light of a lot of social media posts that were really quite derogatory about the council, and I had been meaning to ask what the hell was going on. So it was clear that there was something happening out there, and now I know what it is, and I was just wondering if there is any compromise that can be reached.
Yes, through you, Mayor Zamon. I guess in terms of specifically under the Planning and Development Act, if the council was to write off this debt, there wouldn't be any compliance and enforcement action we could take under that act. To date, we've undertaken significant efforts with the landowner's representative to recover those debts to this stage, essentially through engagement since November 2023 and prior to that. So that's what has happened to date. Any engagement further would be ongoing on the same pretense, and it would be in consultation with them and trying to recover the debts. I think that's all I have at this stage.
Yeah, thank you. It's a strange one. So thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, obviously this is the run with the land. The conditions are supposed to be adhered to, so we're looking at a diversion from that. So thank you. I appreciate the further information.
Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor. Just had a query. Like it says, admin recommends the write off the historic debt for the following reasons. It said would be imposing a debt on the new operator. My understanding is this debt sits with the landowner, not the new operator. Is that correct?
Yes, through you, Mayor Zamon. So at the moment, because there was or is no operator essentially undertaking that development application, responsibility lands with the owner. If that development application is taken up again and utilised once more, potentially there is that opportunity to recover those costs through the operator, but they're brand new and weren't cognisant of the outstanding debt, essentially, before they entered into any arrangement under this property.
Sorry, so if someone were to operate there, the debt would automatically transfer to them, or the city would just instead try and deal with the operator instead of the landowner? Whose debt is it, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, at this point in time, the debt is of the owners, but when the development application is live, my understanding of if I'm just reading the condition of approval, I understand that the approval was issued to the applicant at the time of the development application, so the applicant could be responsible for it, and therefore, essentially, the new operators.
But if this development application didn't exist and this operator wanted to come in here and use it for this purpose, would we be applying a similar condition to that new operator for cash in lieu of parking?
We did provide the opportunity through the engagement that we've had so far with the landowners to invite a new DA. So the two options were presented to them. We could invite a new DA, and they could consider the opportunity for the city to reassess the car parking requirements under the new policy and under our new assessment criteria, or enact the existing DA. And at this stage, our understanding is the applicant and the owner wants to enact the existing DA.
A new DA kind of for this use with a similar lack of parking would likely have a similar cash in lieu payment as a condition of it.
You, Mayor Zaman, maybe I'll jump in. We would look at afresh any planning application. What I do want to note is that there were some substantial changes to the planning regulations a few years ago off the back of COVID, and there's car parking standards and how you work through that, and the ability to charge cash in lieu through that payment plan. So there is an adjustment to the planning framework. So that's not, I'm not going to speculate and say it's going to, it would result in the same outcome. You would need to assess it against the planning framework that applies today. I'd also add that if it's another operator, depending on if they're pursuing a new land use, there'd probably be a different car parking rate, and there's probably different demands depending on how they're running their business. So I say all that to say you need to look at it afresh. What is before you, though, is a request for debt write-off, and whether it's reasonable, and whether endeavours made by the city to rectify and recover that debt is adequate. It doesn't call for a planning assessment against the planning standards at the time. It's really about, do we is council comfortable to waive that debt which is owed to the city?
What would the thanks, Jay. What would the next steps be if we wanted to continue to pursue this, and what would the costs associated with that be?
It would likely be that we would write to the owners once again and issue an invoice and raise the debt amount for that amount to be paid to the city.
So if I can just follow up from that question, though, so if we decided to pursue this as a debt through the courts, that I think my understanding of what Councillor Wallace is trying to ask is what the cost would be, because I think I suspect part of the decision this part of the thinking behind this is trying to figure out whether it's going to cost us more to try to recover the money, or whether it would actually be worth our while to look at pursuing that. Sorry, I'm probably putting words in your mouth, Councillor Wallace.
Exactly
I
what I was
apologise.
getting at. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, Ed, so I suppose that's probably the question we're trying to ask, please.
I think it would be best if I can answer that through briefing notes, so I can provide you that in full.
Thank you very much. Sorry, other people were indicating. So can I just go, Councillor Hallett? Oh, sorry, Councillor Wallace. I'm sorry. I just want to check with you. That's okay. So I apologise for that. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Just in relation to the enforcement, it says in the table in the report that a payment plan to commence February 2018 was agreed in January 18. But then it wasn't for like 18 months later until a follow-up letter and invoice was sent. So I'm just curious as to what happens in between, and I guess how rigorous are we, or vigorous perhaps, in pursuing.
Thanks. Through you, Mayor Zaman, I think what's evident in this case is that at the time of this development application and at the time of this this matter, we were probably less defined and less mature in our processes associated with debt recovery and cash in lieu developments. What's clear now is we do have, we're far along with that process maturity and have a really key, really clear process in place from development, from the development application point to compliance services to finance services, to ensure that any new conditions of development approval that get applied for cash in lieu are followed through.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm aware that this property is operating now. Does that change anything about what we're dealing with?
Not in terms of this matter that we're dealing with here.
Thank you. I'm just wondering about the fact that the new property operator was not aware of the debt and has obviously not been informed by the agent that they dealt with. Is there any recourse against those individuals for the city or for the owner or the manager?
Through you, Mayor Zaman, I would probably have to answer that in briefing notes. I'm not aware of that off the top of my head.
Thank you. I guess it would be interesting to know if there's either enforcement or reporting that could happen to a relevant peak body if there was a breach there. I also have a question about if the applicant or the property manager was to seek a new DA, has administration or could administration do a desktop assessment of what their cash in lieu or their parking requirements might be? Because I note that since this business has been operating, we have added more parking on the boulevard. So the context has changed somewhat. I'm just wondering if you've been able to give the property owner any guidance or could give council guidance for next week on that.
Yeah, through you, Mazamon, we did invite that opportunity. What we would need from the owner would be a proposal for us to give a desktop assessment, I guess, against in terms of their business activities and whatnot, in order for us to do that assessment, and we don't have that from them.
Would you be able to do that on the assumption that they're operating in the same manner as the previous approval in terms of numbers of patrons, numbers of staff, the usual elements that go into that calculation?
Mayor Zaman, we can provide advice on that basis. If that's the scenario that you'd like us to present that in the briefing notes, we can do that. Perhaps if it's based on what's currently approved and those terms, I was referring to the changes in the planning framework. We can provide some advice in terms of the extent of the changes in the planning framework, such as consideration for availability of off-street parking in close proximity. So that's those are some of those criteria that council, if there was such a proposal, would need to consider if there was a shortfall in car parking.
Thank you. That would be helpful for the briefing notes, but noting that there has been no application, so I don't want this to be something that a lot of time is spent on. Just if you're able to do a quick assessment would be good. Thank you.
Councillor Warner.
Sorry, Megan. Can I just comprehend this? Okay, so they had a DA. They didn't follow through with the deal, basically. It's been a vacant property for some time. It's now operating again, but the deal, I guess, has not been realised again. So are they operating without a DA? And there's no application to create a new one. And so is there something that's slipping through the cracks here?
Through you, Mazamon, they're operating under the existing development application and conditions of that approval.
But they haven't done their end of the bargain, basically.
Through you, Mazamon, this is a new applicant, so it wasn't the applicant at the time of this development application in 2017. It's a new operator, I guess.
Are there any further questions in relation to this item? Okay, so then I'm going to move on to the next item, which is 5.6, and that's Newcastle Street, Leederville Cash in Lieu car parking contribution debt write-off. So, Councillor Warner, you indicated you had some further questions.
I feel like we're on a theme tonight. This is great. So, my understanding is that the landowner basically says the council didn't tell them that the tenant hadn't completed their payment. They paid about 2/3 of their debt, but they hadn't paid the rest. And because the council didn't tell the landowner, then it's kind of our fault. Is there no onus on the landowner to actually work these things out before they resolve their whole tenancy? Because they would have had a bond or something that they could have paid the debt out of if they were aware of it. Surely it's up to them. It's the onus is on them to follow that through before they resolve that.
Is that a question or a statement?
Is there an onus on the landowner?
Yes, what I think I will clarify through the briefing notes is to confirm whether the landowner was provided a copy of this development application at the time of the approval, and therefore would be aware of the condition that was placed at the time, and that might be able to clarify things a little bit more clearly for you in terms of their awareness of the matter, and therefore,
Perhaps I'll add to my colleague's comments. In the council report in the background section, it clarifies that the landowner did receive the original development approval, so they did have a copy back in 2013. But then when you fast forward and the applicant and the business owner then entered into the 5-year payment plan, that was in 2014, the landowner was not made aware of that. So from the commencement of the payment plan, the landowner is alleging that they weren't made aware subsequently.
So I guess it comes back to, is the onus of the responsibility on them as well here? So thank you. Thank you for that.
Are there any further questions in relation to this item? Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Ms. Amon. So just looking at, again, the reasons for writing off this debt, says the applicant is no longer operating the business. I think the purpose of the original DA was a change in use. I'm not sure if there was any structures that were added as part of that. I guess the DA runs with the lot, like there's the opportunity, despite there not being any current intent for that use to be picked up again. I guess I am more viewed cancelling this one more favourably, seeing as there is no, doesn't appear to be any intent or any current operation of the business. Can the DA be revoked on the basis that the debt's not recoverable and there's no intent to continue operating that? Or can we put some kind of hold that says, like, if you are going to start using this premises again in accordance with the change in use that we've approved with this cost associated with it, then the cost becomes, you need to pay the money again? I've mangled that too much. Is that clear?
Through you, Mayor Zaman, perhaps I'll just clarify that there is a new operator in there that is relying upon that change of use approval that you're referring to. So 2013 was the change of use approval to an eating house, so a restaurant. And then since then, there's been a new operator that's taken up that tenancy and is relying on that land use approval.
Apologies. Thanks for that clarification. Scratch off most of what I just said then. The second reason is the resourcing costs associated with continuing to pursue the debt recovery. Are you able to give an estimate of what that resourcing cost is?
Through you, Ms. Amon, we can do our best through the briefing notes.
And it also says reasonable efforts have been made to recover the debt and options have been exhausted. Can you summarise those efforts?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So the third reason for writing off the debt is that reasonable efforts have been made to recover the debt and options have been exhausted. Could you just give me a list of what those efforts were?
It's through engagement, through you, Mayor Simon, it's through engagement with the landowner in terms of our correspondence to them, at identifying them or notifying them of the outstanding debt and our engagement with them to date. And that's to the extent.
Is it correct that options have been exhausted then? Is the, debt recovery organisations, local courts, that kind of thing, is that open?
Subject to this decision, that could be available.
That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Castle.
Sorry, can I ask one more question? I'm just wondering if administration's aware of whether the scenario where a debt is transferred to a new operator or a new owner is very common, and whether there are examples of where that actually works well, or is it more likely that the debts are fully realised before it transfers?
Through you, Ms. Amon, in my experience and through the historical matters that we're aware of, I'm not aware of a case where the cash in lieu component has been transferred to a new operator. And so that's about as far as I could comment on realising that scenario.
Perhaps that can be flagged then. I mean, we're dealing with two tonight. They may be the only two that are coming up in the near future, but that might be worth consideration in future reviews of that policy as to whether the timeframes for payment plans, etc., might put the realisation of the debt at jeopardy.
Councillor Warner.
Sorry, me again. Just clarifying. Okay, we've got the landowner who is aware now, because of all of this, has been that a third of the debt is still outstanding. They would be collecting rent from the new operator, who would be operating under the conditions that have been approved, they wouldn't be able to operate perhaps in the same way without those conditions being approved. So then the landowner wouldn't be able to receive that rent. So the landowner is essentially receiving rent on something that they're not actually closing the deal on. Am I correct there?
Mayor Zamon, I think that's an accurate snapshot of where we're at. It is available to any applicant or landowner to seek either amended development application if they don't comply with a certain term or if they dispute a certain condition. That is available to them. We're not considering an amendment, but the non-compliance is not fatal because under the planning regulations is still able to seek retrospective consideration of removing conditions, for example.
Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Ms. Zamon. I guess likewise also the current user of that use is benefiting from a payment not being made. Can you remind me, we've had another situation here where we had an existing development application use and then there was vacancy for a period of time and then it was a scenario that we could allow that to no longer be applied and required a new DA? No.
Mayor Zamon, it doesn't occur to me immediately. If there's any more details that you can remind me of, be happy to look at that. You might be referring to a service station on Angove Street, perhaps, and whether they had existing use rights.
Councillor Hallett.
It has no relevance whatsoever to this case.
Okie dokie. Is there anyone else who has any other questions in relation to this item? Okay, so I'm going to move on. So the next item is 7.4, advertising of amended community funding policy. So Councillor Greer, you indicated you had some questions.
Thank you. Just 2 questions. Just want to make sure I understand. We have removed the total amount available, the maximum amount under each category in the new policy. And I was just wanting to clarify, where will that be defined when they're removed from this policy?
Through you, Mayor Zamon, and that will be defined in the funding criteria and the guidelines for each individual funding category.
Excellent, thank you. And one more so a comment, I think, the funding category special assistance welfare. I was just wondering if we could consider renaming that to something else. I feel like some of the terms of special and welfare are perhaps a bit outdated and loaded. If we could look at a
support,
just a different name
or something.
Yeah, property condition assistance or something.
Through the Mayor. We can check that through the briefing notes, but I'm pretty sure it's tied to the reference in the Health Act, and maybe that's why it's named that.
Would you mind repeating the question for the manager?
So the category name is Special Assistance Welfare, and I think in the document it then changes in the, let me just pull it up. I think we slightly, so the category name is Special Assistance Welfare, and then the description we've got is assistance with undertaking repairs and property under Section 135 of the Health Act. So I was just wondering if we're calling it a category name, can we just call it something less loaded? A property assistance fund or something that just doesn't have special and welfare.
Thank you to the chair. We'll have a look at that and put that in the briefing notes.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question around acquittal of grants. Was any consideration given to whether any mention of acquittal processes belongs in the policy, and if not, where would you imagine that fits within our suite of documents? Is that at the grant contract level or at another level? Be for that to be in the briefing notes.
Through the Mayor, the intent of the policy is to set an overall commitment to what council would fund. The acquittal, we see that as an administrative process, and that would we would set out in the terms of the grant initially that the acquittal would need to occur usually prior to the funding being provided and before the 30th of June. And then the contract that they enter into with us sets out the acquittal terms.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just keen to be reassured that it will appear somewhere. I suppose it's a question of a consideration of whether there needs to be a council position that council will require acquittal of all grants, or whether you're comfortable that that is more appropriately dealt with in the other documents you've mentioned.
Through the Mayor, I think it's more appropriate through the other documents. It is a mandatory requirement for closing out the budget process that we have those acquittals in place, and it is a control that we have identified through our fraud risks that we need to have the rigorous acquittal process in place. So I'm confident that the administrative procedures would cover that.
Thank you. I suppose I'll just flag then it would be good for council to see what that's going to look like at some point through a workshop or another document that's going to come to council in the future. Thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Just in relation to removing the requirement for council endorsement for the festival and event sponsorship, I can understand the desire for consistency across all of them, although I suspect there's an argument for perhaps categories a different type of funding category. Previously, we've had discussions when it has come to council around sort of this is very specific, about the tables in the reports that kind of define how much they've had in previous years and kind of the spread across the city and some of those considerations. And I guess I'm just seeking your confidence that we've got all those parameters set within the delegation around some of that stuff. Yeah.
To you, Mayor Zaman. I think the proposed process, part of that we would come to council through a workshop, through the budget workshop, with the proposal for all the event funding specifically. Lost my train of thought on that one. Sorry, give me a second. The other parameter, yes. The point with council not endorsing specific events would be that should what has happened this year, when some event organisers pull out because they haven't got enough funding or because they've decided they can't actually run the event, we can then look at the spread of events that there are and sort of better fit it in a more timely manner than we're able to at the moment. So I think we could address that through the guidelines and the criteria.
Councillor Warner.
So thank you. Just to clarify that discussion would come to council at some point so that we could, discuss the pros and cons of all the applicants. Okay, great. Thank you.
Are there any other questions in relation to this item? Okay, so I'll just move just quickly to the final item. It shouldn't take long. So with that's 8.2, appointment of a council member for the Mindarie Regional Council from the 1st of January. We will be making a decision on that at the next meeting, and that will be by secret ballot. I'm indicating to the meeting that I'm planning on putting my name forward. Is anyone else planning on putting their name forward? Okay, so that's Councillor Alexander. Is there anyone else? Okay, so we just needed to keep that for the record. So I thank the public and the live stream viewers, and I close the meeting at 6:54.